What a wild trade deadline day for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They get a second-round pick for Chase Claypool. They give up basically nothing for William Jackson III at cornerback. We're going to talk about both those moves and the future outlook of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast, joined today by Alan Saunders of Pittsburgh Sports Now, writing for Steelers Now. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button in the video if you enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content, like the announcements that we had yesterday, Tuesday, about Chase Claypool and William Jackson III. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks, of course, is the new daily fantasy game that everyone has to play. All you have to do is pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. It literally takes less than 60 seconds to enter because it's that easy. We love Prize Picks, and you will too. For first-time users, can get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 using promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com, promo code Locked On. As I said, Alan Saunders is back on the show, making his triumphant return. Alan, how you doing, man? With your background of all your credentials. I love that. That's my favorite background ever in podcasting.
I'm good. Thanks. I like it. I don't know if it's the best, but it's up there. Albie's got his Emmys back there.
Yeah, you know what? I take it back. Albie does flex. Albie Oxenrider of Channel 11.
All I'm saying is I've been there. Albie's saying he's won that, so I think I got to give him the edge. But I thank you. I do appreciate it.
It is really cool. But Alan, you and I were there in the Steelers locker room. We were getting really good one-on-ones. We were talking to Najee Harris.
Talked to Nick Skiba. Nick
Skiba.
As one does during the bye week.
Right. It was just a natural day. And then all of a sudden, we see Field Yates tweet out about Chase Claypool being gone for a second-round pick. And I'm like, oh, that happened. And it's funny because there were Steelers still in the locker room. And those Steelers were like looking at their phones, and I'm like, I guess they're just watching something really funny, a really funny video on TikTok. Groups,
they were just like staring down. Like, hey, you see? Yep.
And we were clueless, and then we saw it
before we did. I really do.
They definitely knew. They were like, oh, well, that's something. And then we look at our phones, we're like, oh, and they're like, yeah, y'all are late, and we're like, what? And it's crazy because we just talked to Chase Claypool. Like, Chase Claypool just spoke. Like, that was one of the quickest turnarounds I've seen. But let's talk about the value they get back. A second-round pick from the Chicago Bears, and not the Ravens' second-round pick, not the Chargers or whoever else that they got a second-round pick from. They got the Bears' actual second-round pick. If the draft were today, it would be the 43rd spot in the NFL draft. The Bears are sitting at 3-5. I don't know about you, Alan. I don't have that much faith in the Bears to turn things around. They might stay at that area. They might get a little bit better. They might get a little bit worse. Either way, that's a top 50 pick in my mind. And to me, that's amazing value for what Chase Claypool is for the Steelers right now.
Yeah, I think it's very appropriate value. It's better than appropriate. It's more than I thought they'd get. And that's why I didn't think that they would trade him. You looked at the math and you thought, well, okay, if he leaves, you get probably at least a 4th round pick as a compensation pick, or maybe even a 3rd round pick. And then you get him for another year, of course. So I thought it was going to take something significant to get them to pull the trigger. It wasn't like they weren't just going to give him away for nothing. And this is significant. This is a really solid return for Chase Claypool. And, it's what this team needs right now more than they need Chase Claypool and an offense that, frankly, doesn't even know what to do with them. And to be able to get that pick and to line themselves up, wide receiver now is a need for them. There's no question about that going forward, but I think probably not as high as some other places.
Right. And we saw it in this last game in the trenches. They were just beat on both sides. They couldn't get enough pressure on Jalen Hurts, even though they did sack him a few times, and they couldn't protect Kenny Pickett, nor could they create space for Najee Harris on any consistent basis. And it's clear they need to invest there. But this is a pick, and this was why I agree with you. Like, people were asking me for weeks about Chase Claypool trades. I'm like, I don't know who pays a second-round pick for him at this point, because this. If you're any team and you look at the Steelers and you say, you know what, Chase Claypool is okay, I guess he's got a lot of talent, or he's got a lot of the build we want in a wide receiver. Why not wait? Because the Steelers just paid Deontay Johnson. They just drafted George Pickens. They're not going to pay this guy. They don't want to keep him long term. Let's wait them out. And the Steelers, I guess Omar Khan did some really magical work behind the scenes to get people to compete about him, because reportedly that the Packers were in on it and they were trying to offer a pick, and the Steelers get a pick that looks like it'll be much higher in the second round of the Bears. For the record, Alan, if they do get the 43rd, even if it drops down to like the 46th pick, say the Bears win a few more games this season and move up the 46th pick, the Steelers spent the 49th pick of the 2020 draft on Chase Claypool. They're going to get a higher draft pick for the trade to send away Chase Claypool than what they used to actually get him. That to me is ridiculous value.
Yeah, it's really good value. And it's interesting value because it's not, like, this is a weird trade for the Steelers, right? We're not used to them dealing this kind of fashion where this trade makes them demonstrably worse for the rest of 2022.
Agreed.
And probably makes them worse for at least the first half of the 2023 season. Whoever you draft with the 43rd pick is probably not going to be as good as fourth-year Chase Claypool,
right?
At least not right away. This is a trade for the future. This is an admission that this needs to be a rebuild. And then, okay, if you're gonna start to entertain that premise, then this becomes a really good pick to me, because then it allows them to really start to gather some assets together and make a difference this offseason.
Right. This doesn't need to be a pick where you're picking, out of saying, oh, we're pigeonholed into a situation. You could go into the second round next year because you'll still have your pick in the second round. If the Steelers, we'll get into where we think the Steelers might end up this season in later in the show. But like, let's say the Steelers finish anywhere. Let's say they don't even finish in the top 10. They finish between 10 and 20. That means you're going to have 3 top 50 picks there. And that's going to give you a really good chance to find linemen, offensive and defensive, maybe another edge rusher, maybe a cornerback, but you'll have your pick of a lot of talent this year in the NFL draft to see who you want there. And like you said, this isn't about just winning next year. This is about finding pillar guys who can be part of your next run of being a very good football team.
Yeah, and they need it. I think, they came into this offseason with a plan that they were going to try to compete a certain way and win with the guys they had. And I think they've been pretty aggressive about realizing that plan wasn't working. I think playing Kenny Pickett as soon as they did was an admission that plan wasn't working. And I think this is another one where the idea of this team was they were going to come in, they were going to run the ball, they were going to have a really good defense and hope that their sort of offense could muddle through and win them some football games. And I think they pretty clearly realized that plan is not going to work. And that's why they immediately started flipping over to the future, right? They go to Kenny Pickett at quarterback. Now they're moving on from Chase Claypool, looking for some more draft picks. And so, yeah, I think it's appropriate. It's been probably past time for this team to focus on the future a little bit and put some more resources back into the draft and find that next group of players to build around.
Absolutely. But they also did go get a player for the now, and that was William Jackson, the third cornerback from the Washington Commanders. We're going to get my thoughts, Alan thoughts, and we're going to have another special guest pop into the show from Locked On Commanders, David Harrison. He has his thoughts on who William Jackson III is now and how he might help the Steelers. We'll do all of that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about our sponsors. It's Simply Safe. Imagine this for a minute here. When it comes to burglars, your home is like the end zone, and you need the absolute strongest defense that you can muster. And this is why everyone should be using Simply Safe Home Security. At Simply Safe, your safety is the only thing that matters. It's cutting-edge technology powered by 24/7 professional monitoring agents who will always have your back so that you always know your home is safe. What I can tell you is that Simply Safe staff for help, they are attentive. They pay attention to what you're asking for. They do everything they can to help you find what you're looking for and figure out whatever situation you're in. I love how the phone app for Simply Safe works. It keeps you up to date with your safety of your home at all times, and it makes it easy to get answers when you have questions thanks to their app and their support team. With 24/7 professional monitoring, Simply Safe's agents call you the moment a threat is detected, and they dispatch police or first responders in an emergency, even if you're not home or can't be reached. Simply Safe blankets your home in protection and advanced sensors for every room, window, and door. HD security cameras for inside and outside your home. Customize the perfect system for your home in just a few minutes at simplysafe.com/lockedonnfl. Save 20% on your Simply Safe security system when you sign up for an interactive monitoring plan and get your first month for free. Visit simplysafe.com/lockedonnfl to learn more, because there's no safe like Simply Safe. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, and Chris Carter. He's Alan Saunders of Pittsburgh Sports Now and SteelersNow.com. Alan, we got to talk about William Jackson III, but before we do, I wanted to get our man David Harrison. David Harrison does a great job. You actually might remember him because he was also Locked On Buccaneers. He double duties a little bit here on the Locked On Podcast Network. But David, I asked him to send me a couple thoughts of his on William Jackson III. He was so kind to give us a long rundown here. Here's like a 2-minute-ish rundown of David Harrison's thoughts of covering William Jackson III over the past year and a half.
Pittsburgh Steelers getting in this trade for Washington Commanders cornerback William Jackson III? Well, for starters, I think the best way to put this is you're getting potential. This is a guy who was a highly sought-after free agent when he left the Cincinnati Bengals, the team that drafted him all those years ago. And obviously Steelers fans are going to be aware of what William Jackson brings to the field from those experiences. But you're doing it for a very low cost. You're not paying what you would have paid on the open market, what the Washington Commanders paid in the initial contract, because a lot of that money is not going to be saddled with you. And the draft capital you're trading really is not going to produce much of the chances that the Washington Commanders are going to draft the next Tom Brady with that draft capital. Very, very slim to none chance that's going to happen. So there's a high possibility that the Pittsburgh Steelers and the fans and the media that are looking at the team from the outside in, years from now, are going to look at this and say this was a huge steal, because William Jackson, from the moment he was signed to the Washington Commanders franchise, the question was why and how did he fit? This is a press man corner who was coming into a dominantly zone defensive scheme, and that was known at the time. It was known by the fans, by the media, and defensive coordinator Jack Del Rio got frustrated at times answering questions about his scheme and how it was going to shift to fit this cornerback, but the questions were very reasonable given the way that William Jackson plays. What he does best is disrupt timing on routes, and he does that by disrupting the release of opposing wide receivers. What he doesn't do best is react late in routes. He's a very physical guy. So you look at the penalty stats, if you go into the PFF stat box or wherever you prefer to look at stats, you're going to see a lot of penalties, a lot of completion percentages. But again, you're talking about a cornerback who's been doing a lot of things that are out of his nature. So that physicality you see at the top of routes that now is drawing flags is the physicality he likes to bring in the beginning of routes in the green area where he's allowed to make that kind of contact. Again, disrupt the release, disrupt the timing between the quarterback and receiver, and he likes to win routes as the defender early rather than late, which is what he was asked to do a lot of in Washington. From a personality standpoint, a locker room standpoint, look, William Jackson is a guy who has pledged his love to his teammates, and I'll tell you, the team has by and large kept him away from us here during these last couple of weeks as they were undoubtedly working through trade discussions, but getting the glimpses of him still in the locker room. We're still with the guys when we did get those times. Those guys love him. He loves his teammates. He loves being a part of that environment. He's a hard worker on the practice field. For the media, for guys like Chris, he's very, very communicative. He's going to talk to you. He's not going to shun you. He's got a very, very solid personality, so he's going to bring you in with that. So again, for the Pittsburgh Steelers, like, this is a win. If it doesn't work out, you lost a late round draft pick that probably wouldn't become a starting defensive back anyway. If it does work out, you're going to look back at this thing 2 or 3 years from now and say that you stole one from the Washington Commanders.
So we have there, Alan, a very reasonable reaction to it, because like David pointed out, let's also clarify the compensation we're talking about here. The Steelers gave up a conditional 6th round pick for a conditional 7th round pick from Washington Commanders, which means in 2025, not the 2023 NFL draft, not the 2024 NFL draft, when I'm 36 years old, the Steelers' 6th-round pick might be in the hands of the Washington Commanders in exchange for
nothing, Chris. Let me just
That's nothing.
They gave up nothing. They gave
nothing
of any value.
What is that?
Nothing. That's nothing.
And to me, Alan, like David hit a nail on the head. Either he's good for you or it doesn't matter.
Yeah, right. And not only did they not give up anything, this was reported out there that Washington was going to cut him if they couldn't find a trade partner because they're paying him a lot of money. And they are, and they still are. But a lot of that stays with Washington. The Steelers pay him the remainder of his $5 million salary this year. It's like a little over $2 million.
3.1. Yep.
And then if they don't want him for 2023, they owe him $0 after
exactly.
This. So if he comes in and he's bad, you just cut him, and who cares? It doesn't matter. And he comes in and he's good. Well, look, then you have to decide whether you want to pay him $12.5 million for next year or work something out so that you give him a contract extension or find a way to reduce that cap hit for 2023. But it's a free look at a guy who was a first-round draft pick and played really well with Cincinnati with Terrell Austin as his defensive coordinator.
That's where I was going with it. Was that Terrell Austin was his defensive coordinator in 2018, and they definitely had. It seemed like they had a good relationship. They seemed like he had success there. And William Jackson III, there's no, any Steelers fan who's been around all the draft talk and the message boards and all the discussions about that and the rumors, they know that that's always sat there. The story of the Steelers were zeroing in on William Jackson III, then the Bengals traded up to go pick of the head of the Steelers to pick him over them, and then they picked Artie Burns because they really wanted a cornerback that year, and it didn't work out for the Steelers. But William Jackson III, now is a 30-year-old cornerback. And I do agree with David's assessment. Like, I never saw William Jackson III as a ball hawking zone guy. I saw him more of as a physical bump and run. I'm going to just challenge you across the field type of guy. But as a veteran guy, the whole point that they assembled this secondary of cornerbacks, Cam Sutton, Levi Wallace, Ahkello Witherspoon, those three specifically, was to have veterans that they could call on at any point in time and say, hey, go run with the starters over there. Handle your business. You don't have to be superstars. You don't have to be Jalen Ramsey. Just don't get destroyed. Make sure that we're competing out there. And Ahkello Witherspoon was destroyed on Sunday. He was destroyed to the point that James Pierre had to go in for him. William Jackson III, I think, is another option. You could say, hey, you know what? Go out there and fight. And if you do a good job, you got a starting cornerback in his 30s.
Yeah, I think the big difference, if you look at the Steelers' last 4 games, right? They get blown out by the Bills, they get blown out by the Eagles, and they beat the Bucs, and they're right in it with the Dolphins. Comes down to the last possession, right? To me, the big difference between those 2 games is they let the top get away from them on defense. Right? Like they gave up the big plays to Gabe Davis, they gave up the big plays to AJ Brown. They still gave up a ton of yards to Hill and to Godwin and to Evans, but they didn't give up the big play. They kept things in front of them. And then remember that the Miami game, they were really good in the red zone because in the red zone, those guys are a lot easier to deal with. You don't have to worry about them taking top off the defense. Even if you're giving up 10 and 15 yards at a time, if you make someone progressively go down the field against you, you give yourself the opportunity to stiffen up in the red zone. So what the Steelers really need is someone that just won't get smoked. Right?
Yeah.
They don't need him to be an all-pro corner. He's not going to be. Okay. No. They just need him to keep guys in front of him. Ike Taylor was a perfect Steelers corner for this defense because he just wouldn't get beat deep. He would take a pass interference penalty. He would give up a catch and tackle all day long, sometimes frustratingly all day long. But that's what they need from that position in this defense. And I think that's what William Jackson can bring. Not saying he's like Taylor, but I just think he has that ability to understand what the priorities of the defense are, and it fits what he's good at. And I think that's the real hope here, that he can just be someone that can be a calming influence. And look, they've had a lot of injuries in the secondary too. I think we got to mention that. We're talking about that position. None of those guys feel like they're healthy to me right now outside of Cam Sutton. He's the only guy that feels like he's playing 100%. So just getting another body and another guy that can come in and take some of the workload will be a big benefit too.
I agree with that entirely because, again, it's about having guys that can go out there, play at their best. Levi Wallace missed the last game. It's crazy. I was thinking when Ahkello Witherspoon was finally back, I'm like, oh, they can finally have their full complement of cornerbacks. Nope, that didn't happen. Levi Wallace went out there. And I do think this would be big because presumably, let's say Witherspoon's still on the roster, and he's at least a guy there. He struggled. He got toasted by Jamar Chase a lot in the first week. He got toasted there at AJ Brown. But now he's going to be back on your bench. And last year, remember the second half of last season when he came off the bench and he was pretty good for the Steelers for a stretch? Now he can be a guy. If all else fails, if these injuries arise again after the bye week, you at least have this vet. You're like, Ahkello, all right. You remember, you had your shot earlier this year. You didn't make it count. Let's see you make this one count. And at least gives you that option there. Because again, like you said, they're not tied to William Jackson III for the next 4 or 5 years. People are like, oh, his contract. Yeah, sure. If the Steelers, for some silly reason, didn't touch his contract before next season, they would owe him $12.75 million. They're not going to do that. Even if he is very good. Let's say magically William Jackson III becomes a Pro Bowl cornerback for the Steelers. Right. They will say, hey, William, we like you. We don't like you $12.7 million.
12.75 and will turn into a 5-year deal.
Exactly. Exactly. And it'll be stretched out. It'll be beneficial to the Steelers. And then it'll also give you a chance to say, you know what? We can keep him and keep Cam Sutton. And then if you want to, like, say one of those top day 50 or your top 50 picks on day 1 or 2 that you get around, say you make one of those a cornerback. Now there's not as much pressure next year to make that cornerback an immediate starter who's the guy that takes on the number 1 wide receiver each week. And maybe he's good enough to do that. But either way, you'll have veterans, so you won't have to do that necessarily. Again, I don't see a losing part of this deal here to get William Jackson.
No. And the other, you talked about Ahkello Witherspoon. I think the knock against him coming from San Francisco was that he had a tendency to be inconsistent, that he would look really good for a while, and then he would have a game like we saw against the Eagles on Sunday. Well, if you have better options behind them, okay, so let's say this moves, even if Ahkello's still going to start and this moves Levi Wallace to the bench, okay, or gives you the ability to play Cam Sutton more in the slot.
Right.
Okay. If you can go out there in the first drive and say, that was kind of rough, Ahkello, let's change it up. Like, let's go somewhere else with this and see what happens now. Is if you have the more guys you have that you trust, you can depend on, that are veterans that have been there, the more you have the ability to be versatile with the defense and, attack different types of position players differently, right? Like, look at the difference between Hill as a slot guy or Pascal, right? Like, the Steelers approach those very differently. They mostly left Art Millett on Hill. They played Terrell Edmonds on Pascal a lot, right? Like, just another option. Say, okay, well, what if it's a team with 3 big, tall guys? Like, who's the big slot defender, right? It's not going to be Millett. He's a little dude, right? It's not going to be Edmonds because he can't run with a big receiver. So give him more options. And I think that's especially when you're talking about, like, the things that I think Terrell Austin and Brian Flores want to do with this defense. The ability to be multiple and play multiple personnel groups back there is a big benefit, especially when you don't have that sort of number 1 corner superstar lockdown type guy. Like, it's like a basketball team. Some basketball teams are really good at defense, and some basketball teams get by mixing and matching defenses and just keeping people off guard. I think they can be that kind of secondary.
I think that they can be too. At the start of the year, I thought if they could stay healthy, and I think Damontae Kazee was also a big part of that.
Yeah,
and
they're not getting any pass rush. I mean, that
too. Yeah, they need to be able to work together, and we'll talk about that pass rush in a minute because who is supposed to be coming back very soon for the Pittsburgh Steelers and how all that can work out. But if the defense gets healthy, KZ, Watt, them come back, Jackson's playing, him, Sutton, Wallace, Witherspoon, somehow you find a way to make that combination work with a healthy Minkah Fitzpatrick. I think that can be a pretty good defense, especially against the teams that they got coming up next. I want to talk to Alan a bit more about those teams and the Steelers' outlook for the rest of the season, because there's a lot of presumptions now that are like, hey, the Steelers are going to have a top 10 pick and then a top 10 pick in the second round and then maybe a top 12 pick in the second round. Let's talk about those possibilities in a second here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, before we do any of that, we got to talk to you guys about our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks, of course, the new daily fantasy game that I told you guys earlier about, but just another reminder, it's very easy to play, and it's actually a lot of fun. A lot of daily fantasy games, you're competing against millions of people, and you're trying to beat out all the competition. In Prize Picks, you're not doing any of that. You're just beating the house, and it's easy as this. You pick 2 to 5 players. If you think you have a beat on their day in fantasy, you just say, hey, Prize Picks has a projection for their stats that day. For example, do you think that, Chase Claypool with the Bears in his first game is going to get 30 or more or less receiving yards. If you say more or less, whatever he hits, if he hits that, you get the money. That's how it works in Prize Picks. You can do that with 2 to 5 players, and you can make up to 10 times your money on any entry. Again, you're not competing against others. You're just guessing right about whether they get more or less on Prize Picks. And it's not just the NFL. You can do this for NBA and Major League Baseball, NHL, college sports, and so much more. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up today and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. Here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Alan Saunders of Pittsburgh Sports Now and SteelersNow.com. Alan, I want to talk to you about the Steelers' outlook on the rest of the season now, because they're 2-6 as it stands. They'd have like what, the 5th pick in the NFL draft,
4th, I think.
One of those. They'll have a top 5 pick. It's been pretty rough. Now, a lot of people are assuming though that they're going to stay in that spot. Some people are saying, oh, they might not win a game for the rest of the season. I don't know about you. I don't think that's the case at all, especially if TJ Watt is coming back. Like, you know, we've heard that they feel confident about him. You know, he seems confident he's going to be coming back. Jerry Dulac of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette reported, hey, he'll be back after the bye week. Bye week is going to be this weekend. He'll have another weekend after that to kind of get back on for the Steelers. And then they're going to be able to play a schedule that I think benefits them in a little bit. And I want to go over these games before I get your response here, because when I look at the Steelers schedule, and I'm pulling it up here real quick for everyone to kind of look at here, but when I look at this schedule, I see a bunch of games that aren't exactly impossible for the Steelers to be. They're going to have the Saints at home, even though the Saints just set out the Raiders. I don't find them a consistent team. You got the Bengals, who you've already beaten at home, and you see what the Bengals look like without Jamar Chase. I'm not too convinced about them. You got the Colts, the Falcons, the Ravens twice, the Panthers, the Raiders, the Browns. I'm not intimidated like this. There's no Eagles or Bills on that schedule anymore. And if you have TJ Watt back, I think you put yourself in a puncher's chance to beat any of those teams.
They could win them all. Like, I'm not saying that's going to happen,
right? But
there is not a team on that list that they can't beat. And furthermore, I don't think they could lose them all, even if they tried, because some of those teams are really, really, really terrible.
Yeah.
Like this is a very, very, very easy schedule. And not only are look at the quarterback talent, just Dalton, Sam Ellinger, Mariota, like who's
PJ Walker,
PJ Walker, right? Like that's half of the games right there. I think it's a very, very easy schedule. The Steelers are going to get TJ Watt back. They're probably going to get Damontae Kazee back. They added William Jackson to their secondary. Offense will take some kind of hit for not having Chase Claypool, but I thought Steven Sims has had a really very consistent effort all the way back to the very beginning of training camp. It looks like he can at least be a serviceable player in the slot. You know, he's not going to be a star, but they can get by with him. Like you look at this team, and it's very easy to get down on where they stand right now because of those big losses, right? Bills and Eagles. But every other game was one score, and they did it without the best defensive player in football.
Yep.
So, like, is TJ Watt worth, I don't know, 5 points a game? I don't know. That may be a lot, but man, how many of those games do they win if he's healthy? A bunch of them. And the teams that are playing in the second half aren't as good as the ones they did in the first.
I mean, they lost by 3 points to the Patriots. I think TJ Watt's worth 3 points in that game. They lost. They ended up losing by 12 to the Browns, but only because of the toss around at the end.
Right. That was a one-score game until 4 seconds left.
Right. They lost by 4 to the Jets. TJ Watt, you beat the Jets with TJ Watt in that game. They hit Zachary Wilson. They make things happen there. The 2 games, and then the Dolphins too. That's another
one pass away from beating the Dolphins.
One pass away from beating the Dolphins. TJ Watt's worth that. I mean, and again, I'm not trying to just say, oh yeah, things would be hunky dory and everything would be perfect, but you could be legitimately be looking at a 5-3 team if TJ Watt was healthy, which is again to say. What'd you say?
Could be 6-2.
Could be 6-2.
Yeah.
And that's the crazy part about this. That's how good that guy is. Now you bring him back. You're a little bit healthier. Also, I would not be crazy to say whether or not Matt Canada is still here. Also, you know what? Before we get to that, is Matt Canada still here after the bye week?
Yeah. I mean, he was in practice Tuesday.
Talking to us.
Why would they waste a bye week practice with the guy who's not going to be here if he's not going to be here? That's the time that you need to be installing a new offense. So, I mean, I don't know. It'd be really stupid to do it later than that. Like, I don't know. Yeah, I think he's staying. You know, I don't.
Is that the right call? You know, because a lot of people are calling for a shakeup right now. Personally, I'm like, listen, I'm not tied to Matt Canada. I've made this known publicly several times. I'm not tied to Matt Canada. You can get rid of him in the offseason. I just don't see I don't think the biggest problem right now is play calling for Kenny Pickett. I think he needs some continuity as far as sticking with the same people that he's been working around for quite a bit.
Well, I think if you had a guy in mind that was a candidate that you wanted to make your long-term offensive coordinator, then fine, go ahead and make the move. And I said this before also, was like, maybe you make the move after the college football season ends because the guy that you want becomes available. Okay.
No, that's a different story.
December 5th, you know, conference championship games are over. You want Bill O'Brien? Okay. You can go get him. Right. Like, and then maybe you make the move then. Right now, the candidate pool is so limited. I just don't know that there are that many guys out there that are sitting on the couch right now that would make sense as a long-term offensive coordinator hire. And they don't have anyone in-house that I think would be any kind of significant upgrade. So if you're not going to make a long-term, I mean, like, you could go hire like Jim Caldwell to come babysit for the rest of the year. But like, I just don't see what that accomplishes. Like, how is that better? So to me, I think unless there was someone out there that they had identified as a realistic long-term candidate, fine, that at that point, make the move. Otherwise, I just don't see, it's going to be bad no matter what, but I don't see it being better just making a move to make a move.
No, I agree with that. You know, I agree with that assessment. It'd be making a move to make a move. But again, back to where I was going with that before I stopped us there about Matt Canada. Even if he's here, I do see the offense improving because Kenny Pickett will have had more time to evaluate. Now he's had a chance to step back, look at how he's played in his first few games, and I've been one to call him out. He played. I didn't think he played well at all in the game against the Eagles. I thought he missed a lot of open options, especially when I watched the All-22. I was like, oh man, there's a bunch more open there than I thought. But now's the time for him. You and I watched him at Pitt. He wasn't always, you know, Dan Marino record-breaking guy. He grew into that because he studied his position and he got better each year and pretty much almost every week. Sometimes he would grow and grow and grow. This is what I think is going to be determining who he becomes. Is how quickly do we start to see that progress? I think you see that progress in the second half, and if he progresses and the defense is playing better, I think you have a better Steelers team that, if not beating a bunch of these teams, they're in there with all of them. Like, again, I don't see, there's not one of these teams that I look at and say, well, you're the Bills or you're the Chiefs or you're the Eagles, and the Steelers don't stand a chance to run with you unless you just have the worst day of your life.
No, they can beat all of them. And yeah, Pickett should get better as the season goes on. George Pickens should get better as the season goes on.
Yep.
I mean, like that, you know, that's an important part of this offense. And it's going to be a more important part of the offense without Chase Claypool in the mix. So yeah, I think it's absolutely reasonable to expect the Steelers offense to get better as the season goes on. I think Kenny Pickett will play more. You know, I think it was kind of like overblown a little bit that he's like, you know, pro ready. I actually wrote a big article before the draft. Like, what does pro ready mean? Pro ready means you're ready to suck right away. That's what pro ready means. Okay. And some guys are not physically ready to play quarterback in the NFL when they come out of college. Okay. They have to, like, Josh Allen needed to figure out what his mechanics and
I agree.
Some stuff and figure a bunch of stuff out about his game. Okay. Kenny Pickett just needs to make the transition from college to the NFL, but they all got to do that.
Yeah.
And unless you're a guy that is just overwhelmingly talented or incredible athlete, you have to go through that process. And I don't think like playing early doesn't really make it go faster. You just have to go through it. And so, yeah, I mean, rookie quarterbacks suck. That's why teams don't want to play them. That, you know, like he's going to get better. It's going to take time. People need to be patient. I know that's a big ask in 2022 with anything right now. But that's what it's just going to take time. He will get better as the season goes on, though, and I don't think firing Matt Canada would help that process. I think that's actually one of the biggest reasons to keep him is that how are you going to get Kenny Pickett better faster by making him adjust to
a new person that's calling everything
or a new play call? Like he's not doing that great in the system that he's got right now, which has been criticized as being overly simple. Well, right. Okay. let's let him figure this one out before we start adding stuff to it.
Right. And Alan, again, because I think the counterpoint would say, well, the reason he's not succeeding in this system is because it's not a good system. But
no.
Right. Your face is my face.
Yeah. Like, well, okay, one, we know that's not true because Ben Roethlisberger did better in this system, and Mitch Trubisky did better in this system too, right?
Yeah.
So we know it's not all the system, and if you look at the film, you can see what's going wrong. Like you can see that there are open guys that aren't getting the ball, or you can see where things are missed. Where he needs to have better pocket presence. We all saw the end of that Dolphins game where it probably should have ran the ball instead of forcing one and causing a turnover. Like there are very obvious things that he needs to get better at that have nothing to do with the scheme or the system, and it's just about him improving as a player.
No, I agree. And here's the thing. If he improves even a little bit, even if he just improves to being a manager, we're not talking about him being, a Patrick Mahomes and just lighting people up right away. We're not talking about just if he improves to being a manager who takes what's there and takes the easy throws and moves the ball down the field and gets you 20. The offense gets you 20 points in a game, and your defense is playing at the level that we think that they can play at with TJ Watt. I mean, because let's face it, the one time they've been in there with TJ Watt, they had 5 turnovers. Not that they're always going to get 5 turnovers with TJ Watt, but at the same time, you see how different of a defense they are when he's in versus when they're not. And for those who think, well, no defense should ever be like that, no defense should ever go back and look at the late 2000s defenses when Troy Polamalu wasn't on them, and look how they went from being the best defense in the NFL in 2008, they being a mediocre defense in 2009 when he was hurt, and then in 2010 and 2011 being back to being the best defense in the NFL. That is when you have a legendary future first ballot Hall of Famer. That is the impact that they can have.
Give me Aaron Donald and then see how good the Rams are.
Exactly. Take him off of there. And the Rams ain't even good right now. But they don't win a Super Bowl without him. The same thing. It's just, please. But my whole point is that with that defense healthy, Watt back as we believe he will be, and with an improved offense, I think this team actually ends up in the range of 7, 8. Dare I even say 9 or 10 wins? I don't think 10. I think that's a stretch. But
I'm not running off Tomlin's winning season streak until it's dead. I'm just gonna say
that's a funny way to put it, because there's a lot of people that are like, yeah, it's coming. The people that have wanted Mike Tomlin gone for so long, you're like trolls that just show up out of nowhere. They're like, yeah, eventually it's gonna come, and I'm gonna say C's had one losing season now. But
because 1 out of 17 is so much worse than none out of 17.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like, oh, so he finally had one after 17 years, and so yes, now he should be fired. That's what your argument is there. But even beyond that, they thought that was coming in 2019. I remember another member of Steelers media looking dead at me, and this person being making we talk, and that person and I we they're not a Tomlin fan, and they look at me and they say, "There's no way they're doing it now." When Ben Roethlisberger gets hurt against the Seahawks in 2019, they're done. This is the losing season, and I was like, maybe. And somehow with Devlin Hodges and Mason Rudolph, they found their way to 8-8. I'm not saying that they're destined to get 9-8 or 8-1 or anything like this year. But if you think that there's no possible way, I think that you're putting a lot of hope into that.
And they're oh, they're going 3-14 takes. I'm like, no, they ain't. No, they're not this team.
No. If Watt comes back and gets injured, different story.
Okay, yeah, fine.
Right, but again, it took his injury for them to get to 2-6, on top of still being in games and just losing them at the end there. I'm right with you, Alan. I think this is a more competitive team than people give it credit for.
Yeah, and it was built to be competitive. They didn't build this team. I think everybody, and this is we do this and everything, but everybody always overreacts to the latest stimulus, right?
Right,
Like,
of course.
this was a team that was built to be competitive in that 7 to 10 win range. What did Vegas say? 7.5. How often are they badly wrong? Very rarely.
Very rare.
Okay? Right. And so things are going badly right now. That doesn't mean that they're going to continue to go badly. We should put more weight in what we thought 2 months ago than how we feel about Sunday's game, right? Like that's an empirical process, and that's how you should expect things to go for everybody. Like, do we think the New York Giants are going to win 5 out of every 6 games the whole rest of eternity? No, like they're going to come back to earth eventually, just like the Steelers aren't going to be this bad forever.
I'm with you there. He's Alan Saunders at Pittsburgh Sports Now and SteelersNow.com. Thank you, Alan, for joining me. Let people know they can find you, follow you, get more your work, and anything else that you guys got coming up on Steelers Now.
At @asaunders_PGH right there as the Twitter account. SteelersNow.com is where all the Steelers stuff is. What do we got coming up? I don't know. Hunter made some waves in the Steelers locker room on Tuesday because, look, we approached this bye week thinking that we were going to have to invent some stuff to talk about.
By the way,
the team was bad and there was kind of nothing going on, and then like everything in the world went on Tuesday. So Taylor Swift announced that she's going to be at Acrisure Stadium this summer. So I sent Hunter into the locker room today to ask people whether they're a Taylor Swift fan, and assuming that most of them would not want to admit to that, try to find out which teammate they thought was a Taylor Swift fan. And so I'm really looking forward to that coming out. I made the editorial decision that needed to get pushed off of Tuesday after the
good call
of the day. But I'm looking forward to that because it's going to be a lot of fun.
Is it okay if I share my experience with this?
Yes,
because
yes, absolutely.
Okay,
because
I don't
story now. Like, it has to be.
I don't want to like just steal the thunder of the story, but so I'm in the Steelers locker room Tuesday, and I'm going around talking to people, and I see Najee Harris is bent over deep in his locker looking at his phone, and I'm thinking like, well, no one's around him. I'm going to take my shot and see if I can get a one-on-one. So I walk up to him and I say, hey Najee, you got a chance? He's like, what? He's like, you want to talk to me? Are you going to ask me about effing Taylor Swift? I was like, what? No. He's like, your partner wanted to ask me about Taylor Swift. Why y'all want to know about Taylor Swift? And I was like, I don't know, man. I should be clear. Najee was not that loud. That's just me. That's me dramatizing it. Najee was actually very calm. He was just like, why was someone asking me about
Najee got the most upset about us asking about Taylor Swift. And also his number is 22.
Right. Oh,
so maybe there's some projection happening there. I don't know. Could be. We won't find out because Najee aggressively declined to be a part of
I'm not. He was when he and Najee we had a good 5-minute conversation. Like, Najee was very cool. I'll actually have a lot of that talk.
Really good interview because he wanted to talk to you, so he didn't have to talk to us.
Right, because that's the thing. Like, he gave me so much time, and we had a good conversation. We'll have that conversation later on in this show this week when we're talking about stuff. But y'all, if you could have seen his face when he was telling me about this, he was like, the guy with the long hair. So the guy with the long hair was Hunter Homestead. He'll have something for that on SteelersNow.com. Alan, thanks so much for joining me. This is always a fun show. We have you on. We'll have you on again very soon. I'm Chris Carter, host of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Find me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can also find my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where I cover Pitt athletics. We got a lot coming up. We got Pitt basketball's exhibition game Wednesday night. We also got Pitt football with Syracuse over the weekend. Pitt basketball starts up again next week. It's going to be a wild time there. Check out all our work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com. Also, again, find this show, the Locked On Steelers podcast, on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. Like the video if you saw it. Subscribe to the YouTube channel to get all of our daily content as well as our bonus content. Back tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers. Remember, we got a mailbag. Be sure to send us your questions so that we can get them on the show.